Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Deep Learning with PolyAI podcast, the only podcast who at this very moment is about to announce a significant Series C raise. Thanks to the hard work and efforts of an entire team spearheaded by the CEO and co-founder, Nikola, my guest today. Hey, Nikola.
Hi, Damien. How are you today?
Oh, no big deal. How about you?
Pretty good. I'm pretty elated today. Or you've been busy coordinating, fundraising announcements, PR newswires, and the like. So, thank you for your hard work.
Of course, of course. Let's just dive right in. This is a massive day for us here at PolyAI. So normally we like to talk about some pretty high level trends. We'll get to that a little bit later in the episode, but now we're going to do a little self backpack because we just moments ago announced the closing of a successful Series C round to the tune of 50 million US dollars raised. Nikola, this was your baby. It has been. Tell us about a little bit how we got to this massive, massive milestone, and what the last year had for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, look, I mean, we just announced our 50 million Series C with NVIDIA Ventures, with Head of Sophia, Zendesk participation, including follow-on investments from Kozla Ventures, from Point 72, Georgian, Sands Capital, Passion Capital. That's it. We're really excited. Like the last year has been incredible, right? Like the adoption of our product by large enterprises and not so large enterprises has been really, really good, right? I
True.
think that, throughout this podcast, we've been telling people about how excited we are about everything that's happening in AI and, about how it will impact people's relationships with brands, with technology. And, it is a big moment for this technology and for us as a company. So, over the last 2 years, we've grown our revenue by just over 10 times, right? And,
Incredible.
we've closed some incredible logos. We've built some incredible systems. And this funding round is just, part of that growth and giving us really ammunition to do even more, to invest in the product, to invest in, our teams and scaling the whole go to market. And yeah, it's been like the last 2 great years since our Series B, and um, we only see good things to come.
Yeah, it had been a while, so let's add another letter to the raise round roster. It, I know that in the past, especially in past episodes, when we've sort of taken a look at the market in general, we've noticed that there have been some, you know, short-lived, thankfully, trends of companies that have tried to capitalize on open source LLMs and put AI to their business use. And investors have been sort of savvy and have seen through their short-sightedness. And that market has sort of fizzled out. Of course, that also results in some headlines that showcase a lot of those thin wrapper companies as, sometimes seeing down rounds, if not just losing funding entirely. What do you think really contributed to PolyAI's success in a time that sees an increase in the number of devalued startup companies?
Yeah, I mean that's a good question, right? I think that the era of kind of like Q4 21 was probably the best time in history. Maybe some of those early .com era quarters might have
Yeah.
been comparable, but not at this scale, right? Q4 21 saw the highest multiples ever, and everything was getting funded at ludicrous valuations. And then, really, what a lot of investors will tell you is that it just has gone back to levels that are pretty normal, right? And I think
Okay.
we're seeing a pretty decent market right now. Now, yeah, like for people who raised at the peak of the market and then had to raise again, maybe they hadn't grown into the previous valuation. But for us, like we've grown a lot. We're in a hot space, and I think like one thing that was really interesting is in the past, people would look at the future of automated customer service and they would say, hey, maybe, just maybe, it will all go digital. And only old people want to use the phone and everyone else is just going to chat or something like that. Those questions are gone, right? Like the
Yeah.
number of investors that came to us after maybe knowing us for a few years and said, hey, like you told us that voice is the thing. We see increased capabilities of all the models coming out. We see at the end of the day, they see our product and they see our case studies and they're like, well, what you said was right. Right. And then, the
Right.
market. If you tell people what you're going to do, maybe they don't think you will. But then once you do, like you buy a lot of confidence. So this was a very hotly contested round. And I think all the usual things that are maybe too boring for most viewers of this podcast really matters. Like, how does your revenue grow? What does your net
Right.
revenue retention look like? Who
Right.
are your
Right. Right.
leading customers? How much are your customers paying you? Are they paying you more and more? Are they getting value out of your product? How do they feel about your product? I think that a lot of our a lot of our customers got, north of 20, 30 reference code requests where they were asked to, kind of like talk to someone for half an hour about how they feel about PolyAI. So it's always a really
Nice.
interesting experience because we get to learn a lot about how people feel. And it's always a really good time to reflect because, venture capitalists are smart people. So if you spend a few weeks on the road talking to all of them, then um, they're just testing your hypotheses. They're asking you interesting questions. Some you might have obvious answers to, others get you thinking. So I think contrary to a lot of people, I love fundraising, right? I love those
Yeah.
conversations. Maybe I should have been a banker. I don't know. But yeah, I've had a good time. We've had a great outcome and we're excited to just go, get back to work.
So, a quick snapshot. You touched a little bit on how we're looking to expand our efforts and our go to market. That's what this money's going towards. Like, where do you see? I mean, is this going to be the year of some pretty significant product announcements coming from our house?
Yeah, I think that you'll see everything from like products to deployments to everything else, right? I mean, it's no secret that we've been the first to deploy fully generative voice assistants with large enterprises, and we're
Mhm.
spearheading our own frameworks around safety and controllability that allow people to mix the best of what is generative with like a level of comfort around predictability and enterprise outcomes. We're not talking about hybrid systems. We're talking about fully generative ones, but we are talking about methodologies that allow the user, i.e., someone in the contact center and the broader customer experience team, to really be in the driver's seat of something as powerful as a modern LLM, doing a lot of the hard work, empowering their voice assistants. So that platform is now being used to deploy most of the new clients that are working with us. And we see that as the future. And at some point, that will also be something that people will be able to use on their own. That's just a matter of kind of like prioritization on our end, but we're pretty excited about it. And there are people externally already using it and with great outcomes.
Yeah. I mean, you said in the release, and I love this. You were confident in the next 5 years, PolyAI is going to be powering the voice of over half of automated customer service calls globally. And I think that that is an outstanding goal. Can't wait to hit that with you.
Absolutely. Look, I mean, the bigger question there is how many of these phone calls will be there, right? There are quite a
Right.
few. There are quite a few already, but far fewer than there could be, right?
Right.
It used to be a toy for the very, very big companies, think like 5, 10,000 agents plus, and then you do a bit of cost cutting by implementing like a slightly more complicated voice enabled IVR, right? Like what we're doing is we're, not to turn the podcast into a sales pitch, but, we're turning this voice AI channel into a phenomenal way for all customers to engage with the brands that they
Yeah.
do business with, buy products from, need help from, or make appointments at. So, as that becomes a reality, more and more companies will be deploying this. So we expect a huge surge in interest for PolyAI and for all of our competitors.
Yeah, the
I think
industry in general, I think is gonna get a big surge of interest, and it
absolutely,
has been over the past 18 months
absolutely.
or so. Like you said, we gambled on voice. A lot of companies do. There's the idea of
Would say
digitalization.
gamble. I've done nothing else my whole life, so I didn't really.
We
But
didn't
yeah,
have a choice. Yeah. But yeah, so to that point, I mean, speaking of voice, and let's talk about some recent voice developments in the market. Um, OpenAI had a pretty significant bolstering to their GPT-4 product with GPT-4o, O for Omni. I just found that out before the podcast. I had no idea what the lowercase it was for. But Omni and the fact that they're taking a really multimodal developmental approach to generative AI. Are you familiar with the ins and outs of the GPT-4o? And tell me what your key takeaways are, what you've seen from this latest iteration.
yeah. I mean, look, other than the like increases in speed and cost, which are phenomenal and will drive like global AI to be even better, right? And that arms race between the LLM providers is fascinating, and um, you know, that's all great, right? I think the whole, pivot of a demo, like, of course, we're all waiting for GPT-5, right? That's like the announcement that we really can't wait for, right? But what they showed in those demos was really interesting, right? I think that just like the broad ability to both use like video and audio
Mhm.
to mix it in was really, really good. I think the demos were done well, but revealed just enough about the shortcuts and, well, not really shortcuts as much as design decisions that allow you to do a really good demo. For example, to get quite technical, uh, the low latency you see there, it's not just about how fast your model is. It's really about how you're tuning and priming your system to respond to periods of silence. How do I know? How do you know
Sure.
that as I'm blabbering now? How do you know that I've stopped talking and you need
I'm
to,
not just waiting to say something new.
right?
I'm
Am I
like
catching a
considering and
breath?
pondering.
Yeah.
Sure.
Are you catching a breath? Do I need to jump in and say something? Because like we could run the conversation like that. Something tells me you and I could with our kind of like creative speech. It probably wouldn't be very enjoyable for anyone out there. But that's kind of what they've done, right? Where
Yeah.
the moment you're not talking, it like kind of stops, starts saying, and like they did a really cool trick where they stop and listen for a second. If you continue, they would kind of like roll it back. That's cool, right? That's like true like hackery innovation, which is why like OpenAI is such a great company, right? It's not just the fundamental models. There's like just a
Sure.
mountain of really good engineering in there, right? So yeah, the demo was good. The whole like gimmick with breathing, with like working on the equation, flipping languages. The voice quality is like I think among the best of the new providers that we see in terms of text to speech. I think the whole package demos quite well, and it's really
Yeah.
exciting. Um, if you really think about, a consumer voice assistant, um, Alexa used to have 14,000 people, right? Um,
Yeah.
I remember interviewing a guy who ran a team of 20 that was just focused on alarms, right? And okay, like you didn't need a team of that size back then either, right? But it tells you something about the level of effort needed to make progress, right? And when Sam Altman talks about their talent density, like he's not messing around, right? Like I think OpenAI by last, Google that I did has like 770 employees, right? That's pretty
Yeah.
serious, right? Because like if like a small subset of those can build a consumer voice assistant that not only rivals but seriously exceeds the performance of the more traditional ones, think like Apple, Google, Amazon, right? That's pretty fucking cool.
Yeah.
And I was just listening to that and going like, you go, amazing, great, right? Will people use it? I mean, like the form factor of a voice assistant. Do you really want to use it? How do you use it? That's a tough question. That's a UX question, right? It's not so
Yeah.
much of capabilities. It's also like, you know, if someone made you pay $1 a year to use Siri, would you? Probably not for most people, based on like the work we've done. Um, and then like, would you pay for OpenAI just to have this or as other tools and stuff? Like those are commercial questions. Like they're boring. Like I think that like just from a product perspective though, like how this will get integrated into the different products, let's wait and see. But it's exciting and they're doing a lot of good work.
And that's actually begs an interesting like ancillary question. So how it gets embedded into products. I think the one true approach to a competitor that would go against sort of or someone who doesn't plan to leverage existing LLMs that are just so incredibly powerful is to do something that's a little more scaled down and put it on device. So kind of taking the cloud out of the Internet of Things and making devices self-sufficient. And we've seen some come to market that have claimed to be able to do that, but have like really not won over anybody. The Humane Pen, the Rabbit R1, both kind of consumer products that flopped. Like,
I
do
don't think
you?
Rabbit. I don't think Rabbit flopped at all. I think it's another attempt at um, a disclaimer, part of the same portfolio as us. But I think that they're making progress. They're early and they've sold a lot of devices, right?
Okay.
I don't think they're on device. I think that they're still like cloud enabled. Um, but I could be wrong about that. We'll get
I guess
rusty.
maybe the question is, do you think that that's the necessary angle to go? Because there's not going to be a competitive property out there that's going to do
Well, I mean,
what makes
to go on a bit of a like history tangent, right?
sure.
A lot of these systems got really exciting for in-car scenarios, right? Where people,
Yeah,
especially
makes sense.
especially pre-COVID, like how many Americans commute for like 2 3 hours a day is just shocking, right? Not just Americans,
Yes.
like very prevalent in America, and Americans happen to have the most iPhones, so this was very relevant for Siri.
Sure.
And those in-car scenarios then like in the world before like 4G, 5G, etc., um, or at least really high quality, like internet everywhere. The question was like, can you do it on device? And also, if you can do it on device, maybe it can be more responsive, right? Uh, is that important? Is there a use for it? Perhaps, right? Obviously, for the benefit of all software, if you're on cloud and you can push out updates and it works that way. I mean, to this day, I think I've had my car for 2 years now. I think it should be able to update um, automatically. I still haven't really figured out how or if I need to serve it
Remember
when
old remember the old school when you would have like an old school GPS and you would have to download the Garmin
yeah,
maps every time that they released. It was so taxing. And that was at a time where that was the expectation is that you
yeah,
had to manually update. So
absolutely. So, I think like the whole piece of like on device, perhaps like for localized scenarios and stuff, we'll see. I don't think it matters. I think the connected one is just fine and it will be
yeah,
better. That's how we should try progress.
fair enough. All right, going back to 4.0. And you had mentioned a little bit about this when it comes to the nuances of latency, like being predictive on whether or not this is just a pause to take a breath, or if you're done making your statement, should we start logging the intent, et cetera, et cetera. Um, One of the things that I think has come from some of the chatter, some of the consumer chatter after seeing some of those demos for 4.0 is the ability to interrupt a voice assistant, which I think in from a lay perspective, you would think, oh, that should be a pretty easy thing to build. Why is barging or interrupting a voice assistant so incredibly difficult? And why, if you do believe this, has what 4.0 demonstrated very impressive?
Hmm. Well, two pieces to it, right? Like in the setup that OpenAI has, there's an LLM running, producing tokens, and it needs to produce them fast enough so you can start responding. And even if you completely abstract away, like when you start talking, right, and how fast the
Okay,
process. So that speed increase is like hardcore, really good engineering. Well done, OpenAI, right? The problem of barging and doing it well is hard. Doing barging and detecting, and just kind of like being able to like say, hey, person's talking, let me stop, that's not that hard, right? That can be done with very simple technology. It can be done fast. The only issue is in this gap that I just made, should you have started talking, right? It's
sure.
really difficult to design the right interaction so that the communication is seamless. And what I mean by that is, um, we've done a lot of experiments with and without margin. We turn it on and off selectively, and it's a lot more art than science. Um, you know, if I'm saying something, you ask me a question, and I respond with a yes, and then maybe I'm saying something. Maybe you can hear that bird there. Like, whether you can hear that bird, whether that means I'm talking, can you distinguish between human
All right.
speech or not? That's the difficult part, right? So, like, making sure that you're not interrupting me.
Mhm.
So you can trade time. You can always be ready to respond even while I'm talking, right? You can interrupt me, right?
Sure.
Um, so knowing how to do that in a way that the other side will be comfortable with,
Right.
that's the not the $1 million problem, but a whole lot more. The other thing that's really interesting in the form factor that they have right now is that you can see that bubble and you're talking, you can see that it's processing or not. They have pretty decent haptics around like the vibrations of what's going on. So, they didn't talk about it much, but when you try it out, it's actually really an interesting problem because you're building a whole new modality of how you're going to use this with maybe like vibrations being a subtle feedback. I'm still thinking, or, like I'm thinking rather than I'm waiting for you to stop talking. Because you can also
Right.
like click to interrupt, right? And that's like
Yeah.
pretty taxing on you, right? Like to have to do that. But then again,
Right.
it works pretty well, right? Whereas like whenever
Well,
we've
also
done
when
it,
you're talking about proper applications right now would be a lot of hands-free scenarios. So the idea of like needing to be dexterous in your engagement with this sort of a system, it
right.
seems a little
So
far-fetched from consumer use.
absolutely. So you might have noticed, I think, that when one of the guys demoing like closed their laptop, like the
Yeah.
things, right? And
Yes.
it's, like, I was like, oh my God, someone tuned that barge in like yesterday, tomorrow, right? And cool, right? Like, I mean, it's what we do, live and breathe. So it's like watching a sports game and just like, I see what you did there. Uh, but um, when you do it in, say, our applications, let's say you're walking in the street and there are voices around you. You'd be interrupting it nonstop. And then at some point, maybe another model will go like, oh, this is not right, right? Like the user is trying to interrupt, right? So often you might just then after a while say, look, I'm going to stop listening for interruptions because they make for great demos more often than not in like at least automated phone conversations. It can get pretty difficult to do it well and it can be
Sure.
more trouble than it's worth. And
And
then
it delivers, as you said, the perception to the caller, like in a customer service application, they just think this is latency. They think that this is a lazy system or a poor system that isn't performing that well because it might be waiting, thinking that that bird that it heard in the background was offering some sort of interruption. So I could
yeah,
definitely see how it does more harm than good.
for sure.
It's really interesting stuff. Where have you seen, you said we've dabbled a little bit with that. Where have you seen it really work fairly well?
I think like the real trick here is to know where you are in the conversation. And like with everything, context is like the most important thing. So if you ask me a
Sure.
very simple yes or no question where there isn't really a way that I can hijack the conversation, if you hear, yeah, I did, okay, great. Well, if you did, then like we, like I'll continue your application in this way, or I'll send you this link. Like that's great. That's what a human would do, right?
Yeah.
Um, and there you can interrupt, or you can just. It's all about streaming, right? And the ability to just hear what you said, but again, to be patient now, because if you said, yeah, and I actually, booked online already, like maybe then you need to do something else, right? Um,
Sure.
Overall, it's really more trouble than it's worth when you just look at containment and customer satisfaction. Um,
All right.
so we tend to steer clear of it, and we allow it maybe 5 seconds before the end of our system talking, and that's where design then really matters because
Sure.
you should never, and if you use the system, you'll see how you'll be initially impressed, like the OpenAI one, but then you'll be like, oh my God, I can't listen to this, to something talking for this long. Because on the phone, we don't go into those monologues, right? And it might just be, my ADHD, but it's, um, if you go into those like rants and you're reading like half an A4 page, like that's not why you
Sure.
use the voice assistant. And that just goes back to that like product question, like, why are you doing
Right.
this, right?
Yeah.
So then it's like, again, like just a matter of like, yeah, you probably want to be able to interrupt it. But if you're going to use it holding your phone, you might as well click, right?
Yeah, for consumer use, I mean, we're at a stage right now where the idea of interacting with some sort of automated system, whether it be a home consumer smart device or calling in for an automated customer support experience, like our current culture, where it is a part of the culture is this thing needs me to speak as little as possible and follow some sort of like key of commands. And we all expect the first time that we ask Siri to play a certain song that it's going to mishear the comment or the quote, and then it's going to do something else. Same for Alexa, same for Google Home. Um, but it would be it would be a real far timeline, I think, for us to get to a point where folks are sitting here like ranting to some sort of automated service agent and giving too much information to where the complexities of that conversation. So I think that right now the issue is getting people toward that natural language, that interacting with automated agents or devices at a level that they would talk to somebody else and not feel like they have to give a tome of information, but also not talk in short blips and beeps.
Yeah. 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 I mean, look, like, will people talk to these things for a long time? I think some people do, right? Like, there are
Yeah.
again is like, like as companions and stuff. Like, but yeah, you're right. I mean, there's so much to do, and they're taking a new crack at a pretty big problem that many
Yeah.
have already worked on quite a bit. It's not just about their technology; it's also about like where it lives and where the product market fit for that specific system actually sits. Like the reason we went into enterprise applications is that for customer service, it's pretty unambiguous that someone's going to pick up your phone call. And it's
Sure.
also clear many years in that like those phone calls are going to keep coming.
Yeah.
And so that's why we chose to work on it. But look, like a general Jarvis like voice assistant, look, it's on everyone's radar. We all care about it. So
Yeah.
I hope OpenAI continues to work on this stuff and that as a result, we all get a bit closer to it a bit faster.
Awesome. Cool. Well, thanks again for today's episode. And again, congratulations on the big Series C announcement. It's fantastic. 50 million bucks in the bank. Love it.
It's great. Yeah. Well, thank you. And the whole team. It's really, we couldn't have done it without everyone at PolyAI. We're thrilled and we are really excited about the product, our customers, and everything else that's coming with this money and just the enthusiasm that comes along.
Amazing. All right, Nikola, we'll talk to you again next week.
See you, Damien.
Take care.